2.0, Pledge of Allegiance, please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, 3.0 is approval of our agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Melinda, seconded by Eric. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. 4.0 is our workshop items. 4.1 is our American Indian Parent Advisory Annual Report. That will be presented by Kelly Jansen, Assistant Superintendent.
Good evening. I am pleased to introduce James McGee, our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and our Native American Parent Committee Chair, Bob Tweedy, who are here tonight to talk about our participation in the American Indian Education Aid Program through the Minnesota Department of Education, and ask the board to acknowledge and sign the American Indian Education Annual Compliance Overview that James works with Bob and our Native American Parent Advisory to complete. The American Indian Education Aid Program supports 3 particular areas of our strategic plan: mastery of learning and expectations, student pathways and systemic supports, and engagement and partnerships. And to tell you more, I'll turn it over to James and Bob.
Thank you all. Part of the opportunity that we have as a school district, districts within the state that have at least 20 students who identify as American Indian can take advantage or be a part of this programming. In our district, we have 337 students this year who have identified as Native American or Indigenous. That's about 2% of our student population, and we have elected to be part of this program. The intent of the American Indian Education Aid is to enable districts and schools to enhance American Indian education programs and initiatives to build sustainable programs that are culturally and historically authentic and relevant, not just for our Native American students, but for all students to be able to access. Some of the requirements, this meeting is one of the requirements of the program where we give a board report about the goals of our program, progress toward goals, and the strategies that we have in place to achieve these goals as part of the program. One of the other requirements is that we have an active Native American Parent Advisory or American Indian Parent Advisory. We're going to see some terms that we use interchangeably. I'll talk a little more about that in a bit, but some of it is state language, some of it is language that we've used, elected to use within our district. Bob is representing our Native American Parent Advisory tonight, and we have had the meeting with that committee and to vote concurrent on our progress toward our goals. Like I said, Bob is the chair of this, and it is also supported by Brittany Amatrano, who is our Native American cultural liaison. Right now, 0.5 of her job is dedicated solely to coordinator for Indigenous education in our district. It also ensures that we have somebody in place to work specifically with our students in schools, our Native American students in schools. The partnership with the Parent Advisory makes it so that we've got accountability and voice, so that it is not the DEI department that is calling the shots on what strategies we put in place, what goals we want to measure. It is really driven by our Parent Advisory, and then we're tasked with making it happen, whether it means staffing or putting programs into place. We're doing this collaboratively with our Parent Advisory. And the last point on this, our Parent Advisory and DEI in our conversations, we've elected to use the term Indigenous education when referring to SoWashCo programs and initiatives. So when you see Indigenous education, that is the language that we're using in SoWashCo for our district programming. You will see American Indian education, that's state language, and Native American education, that's state and federal language that you'll see as well. So the legislation that was passed last May had some notable impacts for us as a school district. Some of those include the prohibition of using American Indians as mascots in most cases, allowing culturally significant tribal regalia for Native American students or Indigenous students at graduation ceremonies, prioritization of Indigenous education being embedded into our academic standards and into our ethnic studies, and further clarifying how we do student counts for students who identify as Indigenous within our district. And then some of the highlights that we want to also point out is the increase in aid that has been provided through this program. Last year, the aid that we got from the state for American Indian education was 89 and some change, and this year it is up to 198.5. This increase is making it more possible for us to put meaningful programs into place for our Indigenous students as well as for our community to be able to access culturally affirming and authentic texts, resources, family nights, and engagement. One of the other highlights of this legislation is that we have the opportunity to hire a dedicated Indigenous education coordinator. Right now, Brittany, our cultural liaison, 0.5 of her job has been dedicated to Indigenous education. She's been doing incredible work, and there's still work to be done. And so we're excited to be able to post this 1.0 position that will be solely dedicated to making sure that this programming goals and strategies are being followed through on, and that we have consistent connections with our parent advisory, with our teaching and learning staff, our DEI staff, and to build on the work that Brittany and others before her have put into place. This job is currently posted, and so as we're looking for candidates, if you know anybody, please feel free to forward this posting because we're looking for a fantastic candidate. So when we do the application for this state aid, there are 6 goal areas that are set forth to us by the state. Support of post-secondary preparation for students, supporting academic achievement for American Indian students, making the curriculum relevant, providing positive reinforcement for self-image and self-perception, developing intercultural awareness among students, families, and staff, and then supplemental educational programming. We're going to talk about some of the, we're not going to hit all of this tonight, but I do want to hit some of the highlights of strategies and goals that we're working toward in these areas. So goal area number 1 is our post-secondary prep. And our SoWashCo goal in support of that goal area is looking at our ACT scores for our Indigenous students. We have a goal of increasing our composite score from 21.5 to 22.5 this school year. We also will be following up with students, Indigenous students who graduate this year to see, are we going to college? Not that we believe every student needs to go to college, but for those that want to pursue that, have they been set up to be able to access that? Some of the other strategies we have to support this goal are our ACT prep classes that'll take place in April and breakaway tutoring services for secondary Indigenous students. I just want to throw this in there. This is our 4-year graduation rate over the last couple of years. As you can see, we had a big uptick in 2022. The 5% of our Indigenous students that did not graduate this year, or in 2022, did not drop out, and they were pursuing a continued path toward graduation. Goal area number 2 is about the support of academic achievement of our Indigenous students. There's a number of different measures that we have for this, looking at the achievement gap or achievement levels between our Indigenous students and our whole student population, both on reading and on math. One of the ones that we want to highlight specifically is the tutoring that we're doing for elementary students in literacy. We've partnered with Teaching and Learning so that our literacy tutoring program for Indigenous students is an extension of the American Reading Company curriculum resource that we use, or ARC. And so when we're measuring success toward this goal, we're looking at both our formative, like ongoing. So we're looking at their IRLA scores, the granular data that we can get frequently to help shift instruction in these tutoring sessions, but also then looking at the overall MCA scores for literacy. Sean, if you go on, I can see, go one more if you would. Over the past 2 years, students that have participated in the program, let me caveat, we're not saying that this is the only reading instruction these students get. We're not saying that this is the only thing that would make or break a student's literacy achievement. However, we do know this is a supplement to what they're already getting. So students that had been involved in any capacity over the last 2 years averaged 0.66 years of growth on their IRLA. That's the test that's associated with the American Reading Company curriculum resource. Students who have participated both years over the last 2 years did show 1 year of growth in their literacy scores according to the IRLA. And the MAP reading scores for students has also increased. We don't use MAP necessarily as a summative measure, but when we do look at MAP, those are some of the, we're able to pull teaching strategies. What are some of the holes that students might have in their literacy instruction that we're able to supplement through tutoring. And the last goal area that I'm going to talk specifically about is making our curriculum relevant to the needs, interests, and cultural heritage of Indigenous students. A lot of the work that Brittany and the Parent Advisory do is regarding our family nights and having culturally authentic family nights. So our moccasin making nights and different activities where we're creating and building the regalia that students are going to wear when they graduate. Things that we are building on this year are our cultural learning trunks that we want to make available to all SoWashCo staff. These are trunks that have culturally authentic and historically significant artifacts, but we also want to pair that with lessons and units and making sure that it's connecting to our benchmarks so that teachers are able to seamlessly embed it into their instruction as a supplement to their social studies standards or literacy standards, or partnering with teachers to figure out where does this fit as a supplement to what you're already doing. We're also making it more trainings available to make sure that teachers have access to culturally authentic and historically accurate Indigenous education for themselves. So as we, over the next couple of years, implement more Indigenous benchmarks, Indigenous learning benchmarks, that they've got the support and training to be able to teach those in their class. And then, of course, we want to continue to build our libraries. These are text sets that we use both for our tutoring, but we also want to build our libraries that teachers can either access. We've done book giveaways for teachers and principals. We have students, when they're in our literacy training or literacy tutoring program, we make sure that they also walk away with culturally authentic texts as well. So building up those libraries so teachers have options for representative texts that all students can see themselves represented in. For goal areas 4 and 6, in anticipation of the hire of our new Indigenous Ed coordinator, we're going to be revising the goals a little bit based on feedback from our Parent Advisory and what we're seeing in district to make sure that the goals are directly aligned to the goal areas that the state put forth and the internal goals that we have. So some of the strategies that we have for those remaining areas include making sure that we have cultural liaison support. So we have somebody who is providing student support in our schools, ensuring that we have an active Native American Parent Advisory, increasing the number of cultural field trips that students are able to go on, making sure that we've got plenty of family engagement events, both ones that are specifically for the Indigenous community, as well as events that are open to the broader community to come and learn and connect with their neighbors. And finally, we've had a number of land acknowledgement and tribal flag ceremonies this year, specifically at Eastridge on Indigenous Peoples Day, and then there was a flag ceremony at Park High School for the installment of their land acknowledgement and the flags of the Minnesota tribes represented there right in the foyer of Park. So those are some of the things that we're doing to support goal areas 4, 5, and 6. That's a lot. There's a lot to the legislation, but I do want to open it up if you have any questions just specifically about some of the other strategies that we have in place, goals, and what we intend to do with the funding over the next year.
Okay, thank you, James. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yeah.
Of course. So, James, I did have just a couple questions. One is, you said that there were 337 students, correct? Native students?
Yes.
Did the legislation, the most recent legislation, affect how we count Native students or have an impact on how our Native students are identified?
It's a great question. Not this year necessarily. There was some further clarification because there is a difference in the federal count versus the state count. And so it further clarified that when we're looking at these student counts, we are going by the state designation, not the federal designation. That's not necessarily new, but there was some further clarification in the legislation.
And then how does funding for this program, because I saw that it basically doubles or a little bit more than doubled between last year and this year. So how is funding set up for this program, for our Native American education initiatives? From the state, right? Like how did they determine that? Do you know?
Chris, I'm going to look at you for a moment. We are by pupil, and then there was an increase in aid by pupil, correct?
Oh, I can totally help with this. So their formula, I think in one of James's slides, it did mention that there's a base formula that you get in automatic. I believe it's $40,000 for the first 20 students, and then beyond that, there's a per student. So like that 337 minus 20, like we get additional aid on a per pupil basis thereafter.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
We really appreciate the support for Indigenous education in our district. We felt very supported, especially with the programs that have happened over the past couple of years, and then with the addition of this role, we're very excited for what's to come. So thank you so much for the support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, on to 4.2, and that is our operational plan overview, and that will be presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent.
Thank you. I will not only be presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent, but a lot of people around this table as well. You know, it's fun to be to this point because it felt like it was just a year ago we were starting our strategic planning work, and it was actually started in February of 2022. And so to be to this point right now, this evening we'll be sharing our operational plan. It was a really long process of gathering feedback and getting to this point. On May 18th, 2023, the school board approved the strategic planning roadmap, which was the mission, vision, and our priority areas. The presentation this evening will provide the board and community with the work being done in what we consider to be our 5 strategic priority areas. So if you look up on the screen or in your packet, you're going to see the mission of the school district, our 5 core values, and then right underneath there, whether we call them buckets, strategic directions, our priorities, you're going to see those 5 outlined this evening. Our individual directors and assistant superintendents will be taking the various areas and walking through what the big work is in those areas. If we go to the next slide, it's important that as we look at the work each year, there are different phases, and we define them differently as learning work, where we're testing things out, we're researching, we're taking a look, we're digging in, maybe testing. The second column you're going to see is implementation work. That's moving the learning work to the next level of actually implementing in our system and thinking about and considering how do we measure those items. And really when we look at our operational plan, it's about all the work we're doing and how we're measuring to get results. And then finally, the third area is the standard work, which we're defining as at least 80% applying the initiative effectively where it's observable. To note, in our presentation tonight, it is strictly our operational plan, so the board and the community are going to hear about the big work. I will talk more at the end about the vision card, and you're actually going to see our vision card come up in Dan's area, I believe, around Dan and Abby, thank you. I thought it was with 2. Dan and Abby, where the vision card sits right now in terms of learning work, moving into implementation work. So you will hear more about the metrics portion closer to the end. Because we have a number of people talking this evening, I think what might be easiest if we can go through each operational area and just if you have any questions as you go through, maybe just highlight, and we'll keep the presentation rolling, and then we can circle back to any one of the individual areas to answer questions. So at this time, I'm going to start by turning it over to Kelly Jansen. Kelly's going to do the student experience. Then Dr. Brookins will do the mastery of learning and expectations. Next up will be Christine Schaefer and Erin McCoy doing student pathways and systemic supports. And then as I shared, Abby Baker and Dan Pyan will do operations, staffing, and finance. And to wrap up the presentation, engagement and partnerships will be done by Bob Lawrence and Sean Hogendorf. So Kelly, if you would take it away.
All right, thank you very much. As Julie mentioned, you get to hear from many of us tonight, and just as you know, each of us will first start with kind of providing a brief highlight of the why and connecting it back to our core values, and then give an overview of the work that the district is happening this year and for next year, so 23, 24, and 24, 25. What we'd like you to know is it's not an exhaustive list, as Julie mentioned, but it really is our big work. And you may notice that some of the big work titles are seen under different strategic directions. And what we have noticed as we have built this out after hours and hours and hours and hours of work, is that the reason that they're listed in different ways is because they have a connection back to that strategic direction, or the buckets underneath them are a little bit different. So when you look at strategic or student experience, at the core of it is really promoting positive student interaction, student voice, acceptance, and welcoming communities. It is strongly connected to 3 of our core values: equity, integrity, and connections. And when you consider how we've defined these values, they are the core of our why, total pun intended there. Ensuring each individual receives what they need to reach their full potential, demonstrating care, reliability, and honesty while keeping students at the center of decision making, and building meaningful relationships through empathy, kindness, patience, and respect. that lead to trust and understanding. And that is our why behind student experiences. For our big work in 23-24, I want to start with what we have established as standard work. So the far right side, these are the things, as Julie mentioned, we feel pretty confident are happening in at least 80% proficiency throughout the district, or where it's identified. We found that they fit into 5 major categories: school-wide social emotional learning, district-wide literacy initiatives, student ambassadors, school improvement plans, and safe and secure schools. So those are the 5 buckets that you'll most likely see consistent throughout the student experience. And when we think about those, the core of the student experience being defined as promoting positive student interactions, student voice, acceptance, and welcoming communities, you see that in the bullets underneath each of those big works under standard work. As we move into implementation work for student experience, student ambassadors and school improvement plans drop off. If you notice, there are only 3 big buckets of work there. Because we really are not considering any new processes. We're confident those are implemented, but we haven't quite moved those into that continuous improvement cycle yet. They're fairly new, but we know that they're happening with a consistency rate. However, school-wide social emotional learning, district-wide literacy initiatives, and safe and secure schools remain because we are continuing to work toward implementation of the items you see listed under each of those categories. And finally, in the 23-24, in the learning work category, we have similar big work, as you see, school-wide SEL and district-wide literacy, but we have added a very big category of high school redesign. And we know this has potential to impact our middle school as well. But Christine Schaefer and our Director of Teaching and Learning for Secondary, Tia Clayson, are working on what do we really want our high schools to look like, and how are we going to align this work with the bond passing and what are opportunities for our students in terms of career and college pathways. And so that work has started, and it's been in learning work. If you go to the next year, you will see that in 24-25, that high school redesign does move into some implementation work. So we will be taking the feedback from this year and looking at those things you see listed under high school redesign. Some of the other examples in moving from 23-24 to 24-25, literacy, the literacy work, the district-wide literacy, we move towards implementation of secondary interventions, secondary initiatives, disciplinary literacy. Literacy has really been a focus of elementary. As you can see, there's a lot of that in standard work. We know we need to do a better job in secondary as far as literacy goes, and so we have been moving from learning work to implementation work with those, and at someday we hope those are also in standard work. As I mentioned previously, just a reminder, this isn't an exhaustive list, but we did put lots of time with the directors and the departments and putting this together, lots of reiterations to get to where we are, and we're really confident that this really demonstrates what we're doing for the student experience in SoWashCo as it relates to our strategic plan and our core values. So thank you, and I will turn it over to Dr. Brookins.
Thank you, Kelly. Moving from the student experience, we move to how are they showing up academically, and it's the mastery of learning and expectations. When we think about this particular strategic direction, the emphasis is on student success by setting clear expectations and making sure that our students are owning their education and owning their learning. The core values that are emphasized here are around equity and excellence. Equity has already been described by Kelly Jansen, so I will do a brief description of excellence, and that is setting a high standard through quality instruction and opportunities with the focus on continuous improvement and risk-taking. And so when we go back to that why, that risk-taking really comes to the forefront because students are owning their education and they're being active in what they're learning and how they're learning it. And so when we get to the actual table, I'm going to do a reverse of what Kelly did. I'm going to start with learning work and build up to standard work. The big buckets are centered on world's best workforce, which you all have received reports on in December, and we do that annually, and that will continue to be the driving force for our mastery of learning and expectations, because we have an expectation and responsibility to report on how we are meeting this expectation that is set forth by the state. And so the work here that I want to emphasize is with the legislation that's been passed from this past summer, there is an emphasis on the READ Act. And we are really diving into and unpacking the READ Act at all levels, really learning what is embedded in there and how it's going to impact our staff and our students across all levels. And so that requires us to, I would say, we meet as an instructional cabinet, and we are really going through the READ Act and determining how we're going to meet the expectations contained in that READ Act and putting that in front of our principals, and it eventually goes to our staff. As we move to implementation work around the world's best workforce, the emphasis there is continuing the professional development in elementary literacy. We adopted a curriculum resource last year at the American Reading Company, and last year we started with a robust professional development opportunity that included principals and also teaching staff and reading specialists. That continued with this year with the elementary principals continuing to have small group huddles and focus professional learning opportunities with the ARC, American Reading Company, with their coaches. And that is actually identifying what we call levers and aims to really hone in and identify specific strategies that teachers can utilize to really move student achievement forward. And that professional development has continued this year, and it will go into next year. And then as we go into the standard work around the world's best workforce plan, the emphasis there is on the intervention and extension time provided during the school day. That is taking place at the elementary level through our what we call win time, what I need. And at the secondary level, it is a day at every high school, and I'm not sure about middle school, but definitely at every high school, where they block out time and students get an opportunity to do retakes, do some deeper learning and extension work. And that is taking place clear at every high school, and it will continue with our standard work. And as we move to continuous improvement, we will look for opportunities to refine that and make it more robust for even more students feel comfortable with participating in that piece. As we go into the next school year, 24-25, starting with learning work again, our emphasis will be, as Kelly mentioned, learning more about how the READ Act and dictionary literacy are impacting secondary. I know for the student experience is showing up in the implementation work, but the learning work is not only going through professional development, and we have a robust plan to make sure that every staff member is trained as it pertains to the Reading Act, but really learning how does that show up at our secondary sites, given our schedule and those constraints within the schedule to make sure that our teachers are confident and competent to deliver what they're learning and the professional learning opportunities and showing up in the classroom with their students. The implementation work that I want to emphasize is really honing in on how we are using the universal and diagnostic screeners to focus instruction in literacy and in math. And I know math is really not discussed a lot, but it is part of the work that we are doing. And so with the universal and diagnostic screeners, our teachers will be more equipped and I would say better equipped to have what we call a laser-like focus on identifying skills and competencies that students need in order to reach mastery. And with these diagnostic screeners, we are going to be able to really pinpoint this student showed that they need more support in comprehension and fluency, and these are the strategies that a teacher should be utilizing to get that done. And then also identifying frequency and a very focused time period on when those interventions and instruction can happen. And as you move to standard work, it is really looking at a list of resources to support instruction. And when I mentioned using the diagnostic and universal screeners, from there we will be able to identify the intervention resources tied to a particular need where a teacher can go into a repository and a list and really pick out, I'm going to use this particular strategy for this group of students for this time period, and then begin to share that knowledge through PLCs, I would say across departments, and also learn how we can utilize that across the entire system, middle school, high school, and also elementary. So we're getting smarter with the resources, and now we're going to be able to communicate across those different levels. And with that, I will pass the baton to Christine Schaefer and Erin McCoy.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brookins. So we've talked about student experience, and we've talked about mastery of learning for students. So next is student pathways and systemic supports. So what are we working on, and what do we have in place to help students get that student experience and get the mastery of learning? So that's what we'll talk about here. And if we look at what that is, so what are those learning opportunities? What are the systems that we have in place for both academic and social emotional support? And the core values we circled here are equity, each student gets what they need, educational innovation, educating students through new ideas and methods to increase engagement, educational innovation. And so if we look at our big work for 23-24, I'm going to start over in standard work on the far right. So some things that we've had in place for a long time, targeted services in our summer programming, walkthroughs in our classroom, that implementation of curriculum, and our achievement integration plan that James talked a little bit about tonight. So that is our standard work. We've had those things in place for many, many years in our district. Implementation work that we're working on this year, the achievement integration plan, that K-12 Indigenous education programming that James mentioned, school improvement plans, we're working with each school on the goals for each of their schools. Targeted services, we're working on programming for K-5 for before and after school. SoWashCo Online, as you know, we're working on comprehensive course offerings for 9 through 12. Mental health and social emotional learning, where we have co-located services that I think Erin's going to talk a little bit more about next. And then a multi-tiered system of supports. So at the elementary, what are those processes we have in place for intervention for every school, every student in the core classroom? So that is our implementation work this year. Our learning work, as Kelly mentioned, the high school redesign. The high school redesign is in both of these. The piece is a little bit different here, where we're actually looking at researching student pathways. So what are the pathways in our high schools that students have, and what do they want? We're going to do a survey and ask students and families what they're looking for, and then partnering with our community and business partners to get some best practice ideas for that as well. Next, multi-tiered system of supports. Again, those tier 2 and tier 3. So once we have the systems in place for all students, when we do our assessments and evaluations, what else do students need that maybe need just a little extra intervention, both at elementary and secondary? Targeted services, we're working on middle school, after school programming. And then our principal evaluation process. We're looking at revamping that to make it more meaningful for principals as a 3-year process as opposed to doing the same process every year, providing more professional development, and again, asking them what they need and what they'd like to learn more about. So that is our learning work for this year. 24-25, I will pass it over to Erin McCoy.
Thank you, Christine. So Christine, excuse me, I apologize if my voice is a little off tonight. So Christine kind of talked us through where we're at in terms of standard work, what we're working on, and what we're just getting started with. And as you cycle down to next year, you'll just see that kind of flow the other way. As our colleagues referenced earlier, we haven't identified any new priorities for work next year. We've got plenty to tackle, as you see evidenced in this presentation. So circling back to the reference to our co-located mental health services, I just wanted to share a little bit about that work and why it's staying in that implementation phase for 2 years in a row. Currently, we partner with 5 community partners, and we were very excited to expand that this year with the addition of 4 embedded mental health partners. So we have co-located services, that's a partnership with an organization where maybe a therapist comes in here or there, based on identified needs and plans for individual students. And what's new and exciting about our partnership reflected here with Canvas is that we have dedicated therapists in each of our comprehensive high schools. They're there every day. And then we have 1 additional, or 4 total, who supports our alternative high school, our online high school, and our 18+ programming. And so we'll be looking at reflecting on how that first year went and maybe making some adjustments and hopefully expanding that into next year as we go forward. And then just wanted to kind of circle back to that topic of the big buckets, or why we prioritize this work as directors and as leaders. It's not just because we think it's good work for kids or the right work for kids. This is all tied to bigger pieces, policies, statute. We talked about the READ Act. Our Safe and Secure Schools certainly aligns with some of our statutes around bullying prevention. World's Best Workforce aligns with statute. I think some of these references are right in your materials tonight. And certainly when it comes to special education, there's lots of rules and statute that is tied to. So with that, we'll move on to the next group.
Good evening. Dan Pyan and I will take you through the next strategic direction of operations, staffing, and finance. And the why of this strategic direction is that we will invest in our employees, be accountable for effective and efficient management of resources. The core values that this strategic direction is tied to is equity and excellence, although I think Dan and I could argue that it's somewhat tied to all of them. Those are the two core values that we're highlighting this evening.
So as we look at our big work this year, as we look at our standard work, things that we do, we feel we do very well and do a lot of contract negotiations. This year is the teachers, principals, the bus drivers, bus assistants, and the office professionals. We'll just start right up pretty quick, Abby, and do some more negotiations in a couple days. So with 4 more groups. Finance, we're constantly monitoring the budget and the fund balance, as you'll hear tonight as we do another presentation. Long-range facility planning, we've been planning for a long time. We're constantly monitoring space needs, exploring alternate sites, and of course we have long-term facility maintenance, and we have the bond projects that we're starting we'll talk more about tonight. And then our recognition programs, our Be Amazing, and our employee recognition event. Things that we're working on this year, professional development as we look for non-licensed staff, and then looking at our onboarding, mentoring, and professional development programs. Of course, recruitment and retention, trying to entice more staff of color and trying hard to fill our special education staffing needs. And then on our transportation system, we're putting in a new transportation software, which will allow us to have students carry badges and swipe in when they get on the bus next year, and we're working hard on getting that implemented for next school year. Then our learning work that we're just starting to work on some more professional development as it relates to the READ Act. HR is working on improving performance reviews and evaluations. We are looking at our operational system workflows as we can try to go more paperless, I should say, or if we have to change systems as the old one is becoming obsolete. And then on the transportation side, we've been examining what we can do to make our system sustainable, looking at different ways of looking at mileage requirements, how we measure hazardous, and an opt-in program. And then right now we're at long-range facility planning. We're just in the beginning of our construction planning as we look to have construction going on for the next 3 years. And the technology side, as we purchase a lot of things with our COVID dollars, some of that life cycle is starting to go away, and we have to look at new student device distribution. And I'll turn over the next year to Abby.
So for this upcoming year, 2024-2025, our standard work continues to be contract negotiations, as that is on a 2-year cycle. And so the groups that are on that cycle we'll be negotiating with. And then again, our standard work in finance is monitoring the budget and fund balance, as that is ongoing work for us. Looking at a delivery system for transportation as it pertains to new routing options, and then our long-range facility planning as we still continue to monitor space needs, looking at alternative sites, and looking at the long-term maintenance 10-year plan. Implementation work for next year continues to be professional development, as we've heard a lot tonight about professional development surrounding the READ Act, opportunities for non-licensed staff. Recruitment and retention stays as implementation work, as does performance reviews and evaluations, some of long-range facility planning, that delivery system for transportation. The technology life cycle stays in implementation, and then vision cards, which I'll talk about in a second. And then in learning work for next year would be operational systems. That would remain in learning work again for next year as we look at our HR, finance, and payroll systems. So right now we are looking at vision cards and how we can measure some of our work around our metrics. We're looking at taking pieces of the staff survey, the community survey, looking what an acceptable target would be, looking what goal targets would be, and then looking at those targets that would need improvement where we would have to pay special attention if the metrics came in at certain numbers. Now I will turn it over to Sean Hagendorf and Bob Lawrence to go over the next strategic direction.
I've got two hands going on here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about engagements and partnerships. Thanks, Bob. I'm going to talk a little bit about engagement and partnerships with Bob here. And, our why is really we work together to promote engagement and share resources to build stronger family connections and family and community connections. We've talked a little bit about all of the core values and how that touches on all of our different directions. The three that I think we picked here would be really to focus on is connections, and which is obvious in the definition, equity, and educational innovation. Pardon me. So really, I'm going to start from the left side here and go learning work into implementation and standard. We're keeping you on your toes tonight.
You can start in the middle.
So really the multilingual supports is at the core of a lot of what we're doing in our core work here. Right now we're working to create a comprehensive system and a set of standards aimed at enhancing our multilingual supports for our families. The initiative focuses on improving translations and interpreting services to ensure effective communications and understanding of our school system with our growing and diverse population of families. And so we already do currently translate most of everything we do in Spanish, in Hmong, in Somali, Chinese, Vietnamese, and then our website is also available in Arabic. However, what we're starting to look to do is figure out some of the translations for our newsletter platform, which is now you won't have to click through links to get to the translation. So you'll be able to move the translation right into that. Also, when I talk about the newsletter platform, and I'll get to that in a hot second, but you also will be able to, sorry, Aaron's laughing at me. But when we do crisis communications through that will allow that to be translated right away as well. And so we'll be taking care of that. Also, what we're looking at is a way for student reports to be translated. And so we're looking at this system that right now report cards and things like that don't always get translated. And so we're working through a system in which our schools will have a way to put documents into a system that would translate those, and then those could be shared out with families as well. And then some of our interpreting services, we're just looking at how we might be able to increase those things during school conferences, and then also into the registration process as well. And then going back to the standard newsletter platform that we talked about, really it's about translations and it's about accessibility, but it's also about creating consistencies in school communications across the schools and the levels. And so if you get used to what a school newsletter might look like in elementary school, we want that to look very similar in our middle schools and then in our high schools, because that becomes easier to read, and then you know what to expect as you come through that platform. And then it would just, that helps with our branding and things like that, but that's all secondary. Really, this is about translating all of our communications and making that consistency. Another one of the big learning works that we're working on right now is our literacy campaign. Some of you may have seen us roll that out in our last family newsletter. Chair Schwartz even put out a video out there for us. Thank you very much for that. But this is the start of sort of a partnership with families that we're trying to get everybody to engage in literacy. And we've got a lot of different ideas that we're thinking through and that we're looking to roll out. And then really we're trying to engage the community in outreach in that and having events in that. We're really looking at community things like that. We really want to bring literacy to life for our students through their families and through partnerships in the community. We've got a lot of really cool ideas about that I think you'll enjoy. And it's not just a one-year thing. This is moving forward into the the next few years. And then the last part here in the learning work that I'm going to talk about before I hand it over to Bob is the tech support for families. I think that the family education, we really want to be able to teach families about the technology that our students are using. And so, a lot of information is shared in campus and Schoology and Seesaw and all of these things, but a lot of families may not know how to use some of those things, or there's a learning curve on how to use some of those things. And so what we're really going to try to do is create a plan that we're teaching families as well as soon as possible how, what these platforms are, what they're going to find there, and how to utilize them. And so that'll be through some online tutorials, and then also in that second part there where we're talking about having like adult education open lab sessions. So, our parents can come and learn about the different technologies and how to use them and how to support their kids when they're at home with these things. And so, and then, you know, we're taking some of those family skills that we may be using in early childhood family education and try to grow that beyond that, so that when you have students at elementary school, or if you're new into our middle schools, we're also having different opportunities for families to learn about how to engage with their kids and in their education there as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bob.
Well, thank you. So as we think about what we do in relation to this work and how we're implementing, we have some broad categories, and I'll talk about each of them. Community engagement is really about how we share resources with, whether that's the business community, other partners, families, and so certainly offering activities that connect families with our schools, but also developing processes in which we can better oversee and facilitate partnerships with, whether that's the business community or service communities or service organizations within our community. We also partner really closely, as you know, because we've talked about it at board meetings, with SoWashCo Cares, which is our education foundation, which is really focusing on those basic needs and staff recognition, as well as classroom grants. And then outreach is when we're going out. So there's some activities here you'll see that are activities that we put on and provide, and there's others that are community-wide activities that we go and we join to share information about the district. And then, as we heard earlier, we have a number of cultural events. And so James talked about a parent night, and we have parent nights, and we have larger cultural events. So really, that's about sharing resources and information that we have out into our community. And then finally, you'll see both in the implementation and standard work, we have a number of advisory committees within different departments within our district. The implementation work now is we've realized that that's a lot of highly committed community members who have agreed to help us process some, whether it's change or new initiatives, or just as Bob was here tonight, just to support the work that's being done as a community member and a parent. And so the implementation is really to draw those groups together a couple of times per year to really look at that big picture district-wide conversation or initiatives. And then the work that we do and we do well is intentional community outreach, and this really is about making it accessible. As Sean talked about, translations and interpreting services, we do provide information in multiple languages and a lot of different platforms. One that we want to point out, we know it's fun and exciting to have videos and get things out on social media. We did go back to having the print campaign and sending out a mailer to every household in our community, because we know that the majority of houses don't have kids in school. So they're not necessarily out looking for our information, and we hear during some of our outreach that the community at large might not be aware of what's happening in the schools. So we went back to mailing that, and remind me how often we send quarterly, thank you, quarterly to every household. And then we want to make sure that it's easy to read, that the language we use, that people understand what is being communicated. Another way that we engage the community in standard work is through our early learning programming. We worked really hard to align programming within our early learning departments, but really the engagement part is doing shared professional development and offering opportunities for communities, providers, and daycares who are teaching young kids as they're getting ready to come to school. And so we want to give them the resources so that they have a similar experience to the kids that are in our programs. And then I already talked about the standard work that we do have advisory committees throughout the district that is community members and families and parents coming to help us think through the work that we do. And then really similar to every other group, you'll just see this sort of shifting as we go. We haven't talked a whole lot about the learning work for next year because we have a lot going on, but we'll continue to implement, and then the standard work remains. So not a lot to share there.
So I'm going to wrap it up, but I think as you heard our leaders talk about the work, the big work being done in the system, why is an operational plan important? And we know the board has a governance plan, but an operational plan from our perspective and our directors is monitoring the work within our system, but also taking a look at how we're spending our time. And are we not only spending our time, but investing our dollars in the things that we say that we're going to do? And so that really is the basis. Do you push ahead a little bit with one of these initiatives, or do you need to hold back? Because remember, we're talking about implementation with people. And if all of those areas dealt with our teachers, or all of them dealt with our bus drivers, depending upon what we're talking about, it would be a lot of things that we're pushing into different and various groups. And so that's really is the purpose of the operational plan, to oversee the work in the district and the movement through, but also how we spend our time. I wanted to provide the board just with a sample because this really is the important part of the work. The work is one thing, but are we getting outcomes for students? And what does that look like? This is the sample that at the end of the year, in June, we're going to have our draft ready. And actually, many of our areas already are pretty well developed in terms of the measurements of the initiatives. But to give an example, that there will be a measure, so what we're looking at, and then there will be a metrics to say, are we hitting the goal? And so what we will come back to the board with is to say, if I just took a look at this one and looked at grade kindergarten students assessed to be ready for kindergarten. So how many students who are going to kindergarten are ready for kindergarten? What we would do for the board is we would color in wherever we fell. And why is that? It gives us an indication of where we're at and what we have to improve on. But each of our 5 strategic priorities will have measurement to them that will be reported back to the board. And we'll try to report in sequence so you get an update on our big work as well as measuring that big work as we move forward. As you saw, the vision card right now was in learning work, and we'll be moving to implementation work as we go into the fall. So with that, I would just offer if there are any questions for the group around our big work. You saw a lot of overlapping themes. You know, even as we talk about the core values, and it's fun, we're at a point now where I think everybody can, you know, whip the 5 core values off, and we really do use them as part of our work. So any questions from board members?
Any questions?
Sure, I have a question. I think this would probably be for Kelly. Can you talk a little bit more about the middle school after-school programming?
The targeted services? I think that was in your area, but I can talk about it. So with our coordinator of targeted services, she's really been doing some outreach to our middle schools to be intentional about providing targeted services after school. One of the barriers has been providing transportation, but she has been able to work with transportation that we are piloting in one of our middle schools this year, where it's an extended time. So I believe it's 2 hours or 2.5 hours, 2 hours after school, 1 day a week. That is the targeted services, and we are able to provide that transportation after that at that time. So that is happening in one of our schools. We're going to see how it goes. She's confident that if we had a similar model in other schools, we could provide the same thing. And so we do hope to extend that next year after we look at, it's very popular, lots of kids. I've been there a couple times, and it's lots of kids having a lot of fun while working on their skills. And so it's happening in one, and we hope it happens in all 4 next year.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I was most concerned about, was how is the transportation going to work with that?
And it works because it's a 2-hour session. So our 3rd tier is done, and then the buses loop back.
Any other questions, Eric?
Yeah, Kelly, I think you had this section too, or had this section was student experience. Is that right?
That was a long time ago. Good memory.
Yeah. All the column switching screwed me up. There's a term in there I'm not 100% familiar with, so I just wondered if you could explain a little bit further. But conscious discipline, and then there's a
Sure.
category for elementary, middle school, and high school, and they're in different places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So conscious discipline is really it's what they would say, it's an adult mindset first. So it's how adults show up in the space to work with kids and recognize where kids are when they're addressing behaviors. And so our elementary have been on the journey for 6-7 years, and probably at least half are pretty well implemented. It's a gradual process, so that's pretty common that it takes that long for a whole staff to kind of get on board with, I'm going to check where I'm at and before I deal with this kid, and then where's Tyrone coming to me at, and then what's the best way to approach Tyrone so I can improve his behavior. And so the elementary's been working on it a while. Middle school, what's happening in middle school, and it relates to academics as well, like Bridges and ARC, kids are coming from the elementary with language, and it's consistent. And so what middle school's been seeing with conscious discipline is that kids are coming from conscious discipline schools, and they're using language about the brain state and where they are in their brain state. And so middle school staff's kind of like, what is this conscious discipline? So we started the journey this fall. and learning about it. We did a kickoff on January 29th with all of our middle school staff. And then next year, all of our middle school will be getting on board. And then Christine's working with high school to kind of get them started, I would say, probably after next year. That high school redesign has taken up a lot of space and time, but it's hard to explain, and I'm certainly not an expert, but it really is correcting behavior and teaching kids life skills is probably the best way I can. Like when a student behaves, what's the reason behind it and what's missing, and how do I provide them options to make a better life skill? One of the biggest light bulbs at the conference was, out of COVID, kids are really lacking impulse control. They don't have a lot of impulse control, and what the root of that was, what the research is starting to tell us, is that they didn't have choice during COVID. They didn't get to choose what to wear to school every day. They didn't get to, choose who am I going to sit by at lunch. There was just so many choices that were taken away, and so that's turning up an impulse control. So what are the things that we can do and make sure that we're providing kids lots of choice so that they're getting that skill back of being able to make the right choice? So that's one example that when the middle school principals and I were at the conference, we're like, that makes sense. This is why our kids are acting this way sometimes. So it's trying to get to the root of what's happening.
So is this something that we've been implementing since 2020 or 2021? Is that kind of right or not?
Probably even sooner for elementaries.
Okay.
In particular, a couple, Pine Hill, Liberty Ridge, Crestview. Yeah. So probably a little bit sooner than that, but I would say the majority of them started getting on board probably 2020.
Okay. I don't know if you know the answer to this. Where did this come from? I guess this concept.
So the founder of it's Dr. Becky Bailey. She's out. I don't know where she is out of. She started her doctoral research on kids' behaviors and just wanted to find a better way for adults to address kids' behaviors and teach them life skills versus complete consequence, right? She still believes in consequence, but she believes that teaching needs to come with that consequence. And so she was kind of the start of it. It really started as a pretty small company, but it has grown a lot. A lot of schools are using the concepts of conscious discipline, even if they're not calling it conscious discipline.
Is there any way to determine the success of it?
Yeah, so some of the metrics we're using are, of course, behavior referrals. But even what the research will say around conscious discipline is that student academics definitely improve because they're spending more time in the classroom instead of in the office. And I think student, like, the way that they feel about themselves, the way that they see themselves, the way that they're interacting with the world around them, kids are feeling better about themselves because they're taught to make better choices versus told it's wrong but not told what's the right way to do it. So they have a lot of research. There's a lot of white papers that have been written. I can certainly pass those along, but we've set some goals for middle school in particular of like where we're hoping to go with this and what are our metrics.
I think Kelly's point is that when students aren't demonstrating the appropriate behaviors, there needs to be teaching. If kids can't read, we don't take the book away from them. And so we really have to be thoughtful about when students show up in our classroom with different experiences, how do we as the adults, I actually have been to just a couple of sessions and I really look at it like it's more about the adults in the classroom and their response and less about what might happen with the students. It's about the approach the teacher uses, first of all, to engage kids, and secondly, so the students want to be in the classroom. And I would say that while conscious discipline is up there, there have been other similar things used throughout the district. Valley Crossing, when we purchased Valley Crossing, when I was a starting teacher at Valley Crossing, they utilized something called responsive classroom. And they currently are utilizing responsive classroom and continue to do that. And so I think there are different ways that school districts get at the teaching of behaviors. These just happen to be a couple that we have here in South Washington County.
So who determines, is that the principal's decision to determine I guess the system that school is going to use?
Yeah, I would say the principal in conjunction with the level, so elementaries, middles, or high school. But yes, how you want behavior and the culture and climate of your school, we have left in much part to the school leaders and the students they serve.
Any other questions?
I had a couple. So Tyrone, I had one question. You were talking about universal and diagnostic screeners to focus instruction in literacy and math. And you were saying that we do a lot of that work already in literacy, or we've started that work in literacy, but this is new or emerging for math. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? And is that across all levels, or is that really elementary focused?
It's starting at the elementary level. And this current school year, we developed our own screeners, but with the READ Act and what the state is producing, we're going to go with I would say a state recommended screener for literacy. But like I said, for this year, we developed our own screener around literacy for elementary. And then we also are doing it for math. And the purpose of that is to really hone in on what the gaps and the holes are for our students, so that teachers, as they are planning their instruction, they can really focus in on what is lacking and make sure that they have structured instruction in such a way that they can teach the scope and sequence what they're expected to teach, and then also do some small group instruction to kind of catch students up. And then what we also are learning is you can also use it for acceleration and maybe for acceleration for students who have already mastered that particular skill or concept, and they could benefit from some enrichment and acceleration with it.
And so is the idea that these assessments are being given multiple times throughout a school year, or they are given like in September and then?
Good question. On the math front, we gave it in the fall, we gave it again in the winter, and we have plans to give it in the spring, but we're getting some feedback from our teaching staff saying, okay, can we pump the brakes so we can really get a handle on this and know exactly how we can use this data to inform our instruction without overwhelming or taxing the morale of teaching staff. So it was given twice. With on the literacy point, 3 times a year or as needed. One thing with our literacy assessment at the elementary level, it's ongoing. Whereas in the past years when we gave the BAS assessment, it was given 3 times a year. With the adoption of the American Reading Company and the early assessment, it's embedded into the curriculum and it's continuous and ongoing. And so the screener piece, we want to get to a level where we can also utilize that as needed. So when students are showing progress and they show that they're ready to move to that next level, let's do a screener, figure out where they are, what is needed, and then begin to identify a path to move them forward to meet those grade level standards.
And so is the idea that like this is a standard, like every 4th grader takes this, has the same screener?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then Sean, I had one question for you. You had mentioned all of the different languages into which we interpret or translate our website and stuff like that. Do you know what percentage of our non-English speaking families are covered by the language interpretation that we do already?
I can try to get that for you, but not off top of my head. And I think that we're trying to, part of the learning work of this is also to try to, that's a hard question to answer, right? So when you ask families, what language would you prefer? Sometimes you get a lot of different answers. And sometimes it's, what do I speak at home, or how would you prefer that? And so we're really looking at how do we even shore that up a little bit, right? How do we know exactly? So I think we know our top 5 languages. I don't know what percentage that is. I can get that to you. But I think I'm also trying to figure out what are some of those other percentages as well, to see if there's other languages that we need to be considering as well.
Do we know offhand, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, how many different languages our students speak? 43?
Yeah, I think it was 63 is what I remember.
63 different languages in addition to English?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a difference between American English and British English? Kidding.
Any other questions?
Actually, I do. I have a quick question. So for Abby and Dan, so you guys don't feel left out, can you describe what you're thinking with the delivery system for transportation with respect to the student badges? Kind of give a little bit more detail around what that is and how you intend to implement it.
It's pretty much what you would imagine. Each rider that's eligible for transportation is issued a badge. At this point, when those badges will not have photos on them.
Don't have one of them, I'm sorry?
Photos, they won't have their pictures on there. The bus drivers will have tablets in there. The students will swipe in, the tablet will say, yes, you should be here, or no, she should not. And this way we can track the number of riders. Right now, we just do it manually. It's how we'll put it out. I mean, we're still working on the logistics, how the students will get their badges and things like that, and new students and things like that. But it's basically what you think. It's just going into a probably more modern stage that we're not in yet. But basically, the students will get on the bus, swipe their badge. The tablet will give the information that, yes, the student is in the right bus, and then it's easier management.
Is there any thought about tying that into building access then? Like how, folks have their badges to get into a building like I would at work? Would we intend to do the same thing with some of the security updates that are pending in the future?
Well, all employees have badge access to the building.
The students don't though, right?
No, and I guess that'd be more, I don't know what, it kind of falls under Kelly's department now with security and safety. Oh, that's right.
I think the one thing we talked about students scanning into schools is that when you're at big schools and you have 2,000 kids coming in, nobody's scanning. Everybody's going in with everybody else. The doors are open, they're going in. What we have talked about, though, is a badge that might be more universal and connect up with the media center or might connect up with the cafeteria, so students get used to carrying a badge. I think that, Kelly, anything else?
Because right now, they do have a student ID. On one side is their student number, on the other side is their lunch number or pin, the lunch code, so not code, but to swipe. We did have a conversation about having this be all in one, but they are the proximity scanners. And right now the scanners we have in our high schools and middle schools are barcode scanners. So there was a difference in that, and then the cost obviously for the proximity scanners is much more than the barcode ones. So we've had those conversations. I think we're just gonna let it get underneath and see how it goes on the buses, and then we'll see if we can meld them.
Yep, fair enough. That was kind of a trick question because I assumed trying to have 2,000 kids go through a door and scan wouldn't work, right? So it kind of begs the question, the same thing for kids. Is there a loss of efficiency or time lost where the kids have to queue and then they're swiping and it doesn't read, and then, so just something to think about.
I'm going to bring this up. I've got some experience with kids. They're really irresponsible and they lose things all the time.
I didn't want to say it.
So, I mean, how do you plan to deal with that? Because that's going to happen all the time. Kids are going to lose their badges nonstop.
Can I take it, Dan, since I'm on the committee? So I was just thinking, Ryan, as you were asking the question, I don't know when new board members come on, how much is shared with you in your welcome or in your check-ins with Julie around how we tackle projects. And so we have pretty tight systems. I think they've gotten better every year, where we identify what lenses and what related or interested parties need to be at the table to think through all the good things that you've brought up. And so this is no exception to that. And I think we chuckled a little bit too around how kids lose things. And so we're going to respond just the same way we do when they lose their lunch card or when they lose their, anything related to how we respond to when they lose things already. We really think this will, I think we know, we can reasonably predict this will increase efficiency versus having to check off a student name. Every time they come on and swipe, it'll be a lot quicker. And then the safety component at a glance of being able to see who's on your bus and if they should be on your bus. If you've ever experienced as a parent, a child getting on the wrong bus, it is terrifying and certainly disrupts any efficiency in our routes. So I think when our kids lose those cards, we'll work through our processes that we already follow when they lose other things that are related to their school material.
I think, Eric, there's a communication component to this as well, where there's going to be a learning piece that we try to explain with parents too. Of, maybe it's keep them in the backpack, or there might be kind of like put the tag on a backpack. Yes, kids can lose a backpack too, right? But I mean, I think that instead of having it in your pocket all the time, there might be some tips and things like that we try to learn and share as well.
Doesn't Altman have like a badge system? Or one of the schools have something, in the newer schools where they had some type of badge to get into certain areas at one point?
The middle schools and the high schools all have student scanners. The middle schools have them in the health office, the counseling office, and attendance when you check in. And the high schools have them in check-in, media centers, health office, student inclusion centers, media center. Yep. So they do have some student scanners that we are in year 2 of implementation with. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. We can move on to 5.0, information items. 5.1 is financial update, and that will be given by Dan Pyan, Executive Director of Finance and Operations.
Well, thank you. Yes, we will kind of get back to our financial updates as we got through our levy season and budget season, and budgets are coming up. So tonight, just want to kind of give you an update on where we're looking at financially right now. I do like to go back 3 years and remind the public and the board that the school board approved about $9 million in adjustments to the budget, actually decreases to the budget, and then also an increase of about $300,000. And then they also directed administration to seek an increase in its operating levy. They also approved adjustments for the next 2 years, and we're in the final year of that right now of about $16 million. The reason I bring that up is because it really all goes towards where we're at today. So those are all implemented in the 21-22 budget. We were able to present balanced budgets actually in 21-22, 22-23, and 23-24. Over the years, we didn't always present balanced budgets, and the main reason that we were able to balance these budgets was the increase in revenue thanks to the support and generosity of the taxpayers in this school district. As we look, to the future, what's going to happen, we're constantly looking at enrollment, and enrollment is, if nothing else, I think I've got the superintendent to constantly ask what the enrollment is. Our budget this year is used that I used for the budget. The projected was about 18,500 students. As we look through the first half of the school year, and I basically take counts and try to average them out because we get paid on the average for the year. As of the 23rd of January, the projected right now is about 18,866, which would be 366 more students than budget, which is always good. We get paid about an average with all the aides and such, about $11,500 per student. Our revenue is affected by the amount of the basic formula plus operating levies. And of course, the largest portion of our revenue is determined by just multiplying that number of students by the basic formula. Basic formula is set by state legislature, and you can see back in 2003, it was set at $4,966. If one were to take that amount and increase by the rate of inflation, as the law will start doing next year, tying the formula to inflation. That formula number right now would be $8,637 as opposed to the current formula of $7,281. It's a difference of about $1,356 per student. You take that difference in our district and it'd be an additional $27 million in revenue. That gap has been filled over the years by many districts on an individual basis by operating levies. And like I said, we were fortunate to pass an operating levy that's near the cap and is also tied to inflation. These numbers here too are not local numbers. These are from the Minnesota Department of Education, and that they provided the inflation estimates and the formula numbers. So as we look at our recent enrollment history, back in 2019, 2020, that was actually our largest enrollment ever, about 18,754. In the next school year, the full pandemic school year, we dropped to about 18,502. That drop was less than most metro school districts. And then in 21-22, it went back up to 18,558. And then last year, it rose to 18,770, which would be the largest enrollment the district's ever had. And we figure this year it should top that at about 18,866. Now, when we look at our enrollment projections, especially for the budget, we basically just use a cohort survival method, meaning, what happened in the last 10 years to this grade as they progress through the system. So as we see that we're peaking out in 24, we're having a class that's been basically the largest class in the system since they joined as kindergartners in fall of 2011. They're leaving us, they're all graduating this year. So we have a kind of a smaller kindergarten class coming in this year, mainly because of the lowest birth rate since 1979 and 2020. So we're not seeing I'm really not projecting an increase for next year. It'll stay pretty flat, and then we'll show a little bit of growth. And this is all dependent on cohort survival and birth rates. Obviously, if we have move-ins from new housing and things like that, I've not put numbers in for that because we don't want to budget too high in our revenue. So a year ago, we predicted the unassigned general fund balance would be about 10%, and that's a year ago when we talked to you at the end of 22-23 that we just wrapped up. It actually finished at about 13%. The budget we're in now, the 23-24 budget, was balanced and scheduled to leave a fund balance of about 13.5%. As we look to the future, 24-25 will be financially challenging. We know the state formula is only going to be increasing by 2%. After that fiscal year, the state formula will be tied to inflation with a floor of 2% and a ceiling of 3%. But you will be able to hopefully match the increases in costs to the state formula. We know enrollment's decreasing because of the low birth rates that we're experiencing, or we had about 3-4 years ago. We know labor costs are increasing with the new contracts being settled and the labor market the way it is right now. We're very fortunate to have our operating levy tied to inflation. And we're starting to work on our 24-25 budget. We will try to, in the next couple of weeks, revise the current budget to see how we're going to end up. There are some things that we budgeted for that didn't happen. It hasn't snowed much, so we haven't had to do a lot of snow plowing, which helps.
You didn't just say that.
Yeah, you just totally jinxed us.
The next snow I see is like 10 days out, so. But, we also had our new contract settled, so we had to put all those numbers into place, and we're anxious to see how our budget's going to look for this year, and then we'll have to look at next year as far as new revenues go. Most of my funding resources and knowledge and projections all come from what we know what the state legislature does. This session is not a funding session. So I'm really not expecting any new K-12 funding. We may, we've put some platforms together with my various groups, and there's some asking, but I think it's not going to be one in which there's going to be a lot of new funding for K-12 schools. They scheduled the special education cross-subsidy to increase, but that's not until 26, 27, in which the funding will increase from 44% of the cross-subsidy to 50% of the cross-subsidy. So we're just going to have to kind of stay tuned to see what's going on. I think we're going to have to probably get our first update in a couple of weeks on what's going on up there, but I think there's some logistical things that we'd like them to tackle, like, you know, the unemployment issue, how do we handle the staffing issues from that, the free meals, do we have enough staff to keep doing this, and things like that. So that's where we're kind of at. We'll know, once we present the revised budget to you, then you'll have a lot better idea of how we're going to end up and then what we need to do for next year.
Thank you, Dan. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Well, then we'll move on to 5.2, and that will be our monthly construction update, and Dan is up again.
Thank you again. I'll just give everybody an update on what's going on with all our 15 different bond projects. As a reminder to the board and the public that the public approved $200 million in school construction at our last general election. Question 1 focused on $160 million, focused on safety and security and expanding the secondary schools. Question 2 for $40 million focused on expanding 4 elementary schools and improving the restroom facilities at 4 other elementary schools, well, 5 other elementary schools, because Pine Hills doubled up on that. Our design process really revolves around, I would say, you know, it revolves around the user groups. We have hired 2 architect firms to handle the 15 different projects. One is Wold Architects and one is Coma Architects. Kraus Anderson is our construction manager, as approved by the board. The architects are working on their different projects, and they are guided by the user groups that are led by assistant superintendents, as you can see on there. They have advisory groups, they have leadership teams, and all that input goes into the designers, who will then put together the drawings and write the specs so we can go out for permits and bids. Anything that happens in the meantime goes through the Construction Advisory Committee for decisions to be made, and the Construction Advisory Committee will go up to Exec Cabinet if they need a decision on certain aspects of the plan. Of course, the school board is always advised by the Exec Cabinet and the superintendent on what's going on. So we began the design and planning process for 15 projects across the district. The highest priority in the election was addressing safety and security and overcrowding in our secondary schools, and those are the projects we're starting on first. We're meeting with groups of staff to gather input, feedback, and start the design work for additions and renovations at Cottage Grove, Lake, Oatman, and Woodbury Middle Schools, and of course our 3 high schools, East Ridge Park and Woodbury High Schools. And then January 2025, a year from now, we'll start working on the 4 elementary school construction projects and improving the restrooms. This chart, oops, can you go back? I'm sorry. This chart is one that's easy to look at to see actually, really at the end of the blue is when stuff is done. And that's where you can see, just at a glance, you know, what projects will be done first. And basically the middle school projects, the secured entrances should, and then the expansion to Oatman should all be done by the fall of 2026. And then the East Ridge High School expansion hopefully will be done by the fall of 2026. And you can see the rest. The main thing when you look at this chart is you look at the green. At the end of the green, that's when we go out for permits and when we let for bids. And then as soon as those are exciting times for bean counters as we try to see if we're going to fit inside our budgets and stuff like that. So as we talk about some of the different user groups, the Park High School user group has been working on the Kitchen Cafe. They have Kitchen Cafe user group. They have a front entry student services user group, and they have a career tech education user group. And they've been meeting to discuss different things, and our designers, the architects are taking all this in as they want to put together their plans. The East Ridge has a classroom addition user group that's met as they talked about pod layouts, science classrooms, online learner space, and they also have a CTE education user group also as they talk about science, art, facts, business, robotics. The Ullman Middle School user group has held their first meeting on January 17th. They discussed their roles. They looked at the scope and schedule, started to identify priorities, and discuss kitchen and cafeteria spaces, needs, and flows. We've also held meetings with trade and industry partners to gather feedback to identify current and upcoming trends in CTE, career tech education, and to talk about needs and wants for current CTE and trade industry spaces in our schools. And we're working to organize virtual tours of new high schools in the area. We've also held construction standards meetings to create consistency across the district for projects used in our buildings. Those standards include safety and security construction standards, nutrition services standards, technology standards, HVAC standards, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and then also core, shell, and finish standards. The Construction Advisory Committee and the Executive Committee, had met to talk about a decision on what to do as there was questions on the Woodbury High School pool. As you know, Woodbury High School is going through a major renovation, and in the plan, that pool would not fit into where the cafeteria was going to go. As we looked at the Woodbury Middle School pool, the decision was made to permanently close the Woodbury High School pool at the end of the 24-25 boys swimming season. The Woodbury Middle School pool will be permanently closed also. That has not been in operation for a couple of years already, but it will be definitely as we work to change the space in Woodbury Middle School. So as that comes around, we're working with school administration, activities, coaches to create equitable practice and competition times for the East Ridge High School and Woodbury High School swimming and diving teams at both Lake and Oldman Middle Schools. There will not be any cuts to our swimming programs. All our swim teams will have the space to practice and compete. There will not be any changes to the Park High School swimming and diving programs. There is a plan to reopen the community pool, which is in South St. Paul Park, before the Woodbury High School pool is decommissioned. The community pool will be available to community education for swim lessons and to other renters interested in using the space. We will monitor the use and cost of maintaining this community pool over the next 2 years before determining the next steps. As we look forward, user group meetings will begin at Woodbury High School and Woodbury Middle School in February. User group meetings for Cottage Grove Middle School will begin in April. And all along, we've been doing site surveys and soil boring drillings at the several sites across the districts. And if anybody wants any construction updates, they can visit SoWashCo.org. Any questions?
Thank you, Dan. Does anybody have any questions?
I just had one. How are you, so I remember before the previous bond, we had our student ambassadors come and they talked to us about all of the things that they would like to see in our schools. Are we involving students as we do these renovations, and if so, like to what extent?
Our assistant soups are leading the user group, so maybe I'll see if they want to answer that.
Yep, so right now, we're working with a lot of staff in all of the schools. The high schools in particular is where we started. And yes, we will bring
a lot of that back to our district youth ambassadors, and each principal will bring that back to their school ambassadors, yes. But we're still really early in the process. We have nothing to bring to them, probably until the fall.
Okay.
And I'm actually thinking, having been part of the Altman construction, is when we really involved the students was when it came time for furniture and fixtures. And we had sample rooms, the kids got to try out different equipment. Sometimes the organization of space is difficult for kids to give input when it's such a large scale, but definitely when we get to the FF&E portion.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
On to 5.3, first reading of proposed policy changes, and that will be presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent.
I know that everyone loves the workshop meeting because every meeting, with the exception of just one, I think, we always do policies. And so I appreciate the team that surrounds me because we have really stuck to our schedule in terms of reviewing policy. This evening, I'm bringing forward policies that are reviewed yearly and have been revised to reflect updates in the Minnesota statutes, definition of terms, legal references, and cross-references. Our board policy committee, along with leaders around this table, have been consulted and reviewed the policies prior to this meeting. This evening, I'm bringing forth policy 410, family and medical leave. There was just one proposed change in language, section 4, letter B, and the cross-references. Policy 413, harassment and violence, there was a proposed change to the definition of sexual orientation, which adheres to the Minnesota Human Rights Act and the 2023 legislation. So the definition was just changed. 414, mandated reporting of child neglect or physical or sexual abuse, no proposed changes. Mandated reporting of maltreatment of vulnerable adults, no proposed changes. The next were just slight grammatical changes, and that was policy 505, distribution of non-school sponsored materials. 514, our bullying prohibition policy, there were no proposed changes. 522, Title IX, non-discrimination policy, grievance, procedure, and process, no proposed changes. Policy 616, school district system accountability. Information was added to that policy around our CIRC process, and we are working on making sure we spell out all those acronyms, standards and instruction review cycle. Finally, 626 is a new policy, and that policy is around literacy and the READ Act, just to incorporate in that legislation. And finally, 806, crisis management, there were no proposed changes. And so with that, I would open it up if there are any other questions from board members.
Any questions?
I do have one, Julie. In regards to definitions in the policy, are we required, I know the definition of sexual orientation was changed, are we required to adhere to the legislative law, in that? Are we required to do that?
We are required to adhere to the language in the statute, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is why it was included now in the policy, because we are required to adhere to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing no questions, we do allow public comment after policies. No one has signed up. So we will move on to 6.0, reports and comments. Superintendent Nielsen.
Thank you. I was telling Katie before the meeting I can have one small Post-it note and talk for a good 30 minutes, but I'm going to make this real quick. On Sunday, it's a new night for our Suburban East Conference Music Festival. Many board members typically attend. It's usually on, I think, a Thursday night. This year it's on this coming Sunday. It will feature our high school band students, orchestra students, and choir students, and it's a select group from across the entire conference. And that particular concert will start at 6 o'clock on Sunday night. Next, I just wanted to highlight very briefly, on Monday was a professional development day for our staff. Various groups, I know our transportation staff had professional development. The bulk of our teaching staff were at Eastridge, a couple other sites, but it was really just a tremendous day. And I know when we have days on the calendar, and as board members, you know we're going to have more days next year with the READ Act, but sometimes there's the wonderment from parents about, why do teachers need a day off? Why do they need a day off? And I think it's important that we're reminded that in many other professions, there are opportunities for professional development all the time. We're talking about the teachers and the staff who work with our kids every day. And so I think for the board to know, for our community here, from me, that those days are well invested in the people that work with our little human beings every single day. And so it was a great day. Probably the most powerful thing is while we had great outside speakers come in, we have teacher leaders on our staff that are leading sessions and supporting their colleagues, and that is the most beneficial part. Next, also, while not wanting to leave one out, One Act, or Minnesota State High School League will have the One Act Play Festival, which will be at St. Kate's, and that is scheduled for Thursday, February 8th. And I also want to let all of you know that I was on tour today at District Program Center. I did the early learning, the alternative high school, and the senior center. And I got to the senior center. I talked with a great group of 10 guys. You know, I could talk a little farming with them with that one over big. And then I circled the building and had some conversations, and I went back, and there was a session on hands and feet. And I thought, I have come to the right place. They are giving massages. And so I stepped in, and I said, well, where are the massages? And they said, no, it's a card game. It's called Hands and Feet. Anyone ever play Hands and Feet?
Never heard of it.
Exactly. It's a massage. Oh, hand and foot. I don't know, hands, feet. All I know is I thought it was a massage when I was going there, and all I saw were ladies sitting around the table and a couple of guys sprinkled in there, but there was 500 on one side and hands and foot. Hand and foot. Again, I got 2 hands and 2 feet, and I wanted a massage, but that wasn't happening. But really, just what a nice opportunity for our seniors to get together. And we have a number of our adult students, or adults learning English, who were also in a class, and they run the little cafeteria down there with the coffee shop, making scones. Today's soup was broccoli cheese, I believe. I don't think they had high sales today. I think they said 1 bowl. But just really great individuals down there. And as we sign off tonight, I just want to recognize each of you as board members. February is School Board Recognition Month. And our executive cabinet wanted to say thank you for your commitment to our public schools, the students, staff, and parents that we serve here in South Washington County Schools. And so we wanted to treat you to a nothing bundt cake and a certificate of appreciation. So thank you so much for what you do for our students and for all of us.
Thank you. Okay, on to board member reports. Do any board members have any events or upcoming activities that they would like to share? We are not, nope, those would be shared with Dana. She sent out an email today. We will just share any upcoming events that might be happening on any committees we have, such as like the Bob, the Foundation, and that. Legacy. Yes, on February 29th, on Leap Day, would be coming up. Okay, and then we will move into 7.0, future meeting dates. February 22nd is a school board business meeting here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. And then March 14th is a school board workshop meeting here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. And with that, 8.0, and we are adjourned.
After spring break. Right. I was assuming.